dive. And today we're going to get into something pretty interesting, I think, at least to me, this whole concept of the virtuous woman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've probably heard this phrase before.
Yeah.
Maybe you've even read about it in Proverbs 31.
Right.
But we're going to kind of take a little bit of a different approach to this today.
Mm-hmm.
And we're bringing in some insights from a devotional that I came across by Dr. Javier Palmer.
Okay.
It's called El Misterio de Dios en la Mujer Día 3,
Okay.
which basically translates to the mystery of God in woman.
Interesting.
And before you think, oh, this is going to be some, old-fashioned lecture,
Yeah.
let me tell you, Dr. Palmer's perspective on this is anything but.
You're right. You're right. He really does tackle that head on.
Yeah.
That sense of it being outdated.
Right.
Because I think, the word virtuous itself can kind of conjure up all these images, restrictive rules, like you have to be this way or that way. But if you look closely at Proverbs 31.30, there's this contrast between beauty, kind of that fleeting external beauty,
Right.
and the lasting impact of character, your inner qualities.
Yeah.
And Dr. Palmer really emphasizes that it's not about looking a certain way or behaving a certain way just to fit in. It's about cultivating a strength that comes from within.
Yeah, I love that. It's about who you are, not just how you look.
Exactly.
And speaking of looks, I came across this quote from Dr. Palmer that I just loved.
Okay.
He says, and I'll read it in Spanish first because it sounds prettier.
Okay.
Una mujer virtuosa no es ser adinerada o tener el pelo, la cara o el cuerpo más atractivo del mundo, sino que tenga la actitud más agradable que pueda expresar.
Wow.
It's basically saying that a virtuous woman isn't defined by her wealth or by having the most attractive physical features, hair, face, body,
Right.
but by her ability to express the most agreeable attitude.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not about, just the outside. It's that inner attitude.
Yeah, it's about your heart and how that kind of shapes your interactions with the world.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a key point because it's not about checking off boxes
Right.
or meeting some external standard. It's really about how do those inner qualities that you're talking about, how do they come out in your everyday life?
So how does that actually play out? What does that agreeable attitude look like practically?
Well, Dr. Palmer kind of roots a lot of it in faith.
Okay.
A deep, active faith. He describes it as something that shapes every decision you make.
Wow.
Every interaction you have. It's about living out your faith.
Right.
Not just talking about it.
Yeah, not just saying you have faith.
Exactly.
But actually living it. That makes a lot of sense. But it also makes me think wouldn't that be incredibly challenging?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, life throws us all these curveballs.
All the time.
Yeah, so how can you possibly maintain that kind of consistency in your faith?
Well, I think that's where the inner qualities that we were talking about come into play. Those traits that Dr. Palmer talks about, patience, perseverance, gratitude.
Okay, yeah.
Those become kind of the natural overflow of a life that's grounded in faith.
So it's not about being perfect.
No.
It's about having that source of strength to draw on.
Exactly.
When things get tough.
When those curveballs come, you have something to hold on to.
Okay, so this virtuous woman isn't just some kind of abstract idea, right?
No, not at all.
She's got some real grit.
Yes.
She's someone who faces those challenges head on because of her faith.
And I love how he uses that word grit because she does. She's resilient.
Yeah, exactly. She's not just sitting back and letting life happen to her. She's taking charge.
Absolutely. And that strength isn't meant to be kept inside. It flows out. And it fuels her compassion and her desire to help others.
Oh, okay. So it's not just about personal strength. It's about using that strength to lift others up.
Exactly. Dr. Palmer talks about her being a woman of action. She sees a need.
Yeah.
She takes initiative.
I like that. So it's not just about her own personal piety or spirituality.
That's right.
It's about making a real difference in the world around her.
That's a great way to put it, putting her faith into action. And speaking of action, he specifically calls out that the virtuous woman is a woman of prayer.
Oh, interesting.
But not prayer as a last resort, I've tried everything else, now I'll pray.
Right.
It's her first response.
Oh, wow. So she's not just reacting to life's challenges. She's actively seeking guidance and strength through prayer.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. I imagine that would change your whole perspective. It's you're not going through it alone. You've got that partnership.
Precisely. You have a partner, and that allows you to be resourceful.
Yeah.
Find those creative solutions to problems.
Okay. So she's got this deep faith, this agreeable attitude, this active compassion. I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
It does. It really does. And, in Proverbs 31, it highlights some other interesting aspects of her character.
Okay, tell me more. What else does it say?
Well, for instance, it talks about her being a skilled businesswoman.
Wait a minute. I thought we were talking about spirituality and character, not business skills.
I know, right? It's kind of surprising.
Yeah. Is Proverbs 31 telling us we all need to be entrepreneurs?
Not necessarily, but Dr. Palmer emphasizes that her faith is woven into every area of her life,
Yeah.
including her work. It's not about separating the sacred from the secular. It's about approaching everything with that same integrity and desire to use your talents for good.
So it's not about rejecting success. It's about redefining what success means.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
doing it all with that agreeable attitude we talked
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
It's work with the spirit of service, generosity, humility.
This is really making me rethink the whole idea of virtue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about being good or doing the right things.
Yeah.
It's about that inner strength and resilience that comes from faith. And then using that strength to make a real difference.
You've hit the nail on the head because it's not about trying to fit a mold.
Right.
It's about living a life that has purpose,
Yeah.
that's driven by your values and faith, and constantly looking for ways to use your talents to do good.
And that's something we can all strive for, right? It's not about being perfect, but about living intentionally.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that intentionality, I think, that's where the virtuous woman's wisdom comes into play.
Okay, now you're really intriguing me. Tell me more about this wisdom. Is she like some all-knowing sage or something?
Well, it's not so much about having all the answers. It's
Right.
more about having a really deep understanding of herself,
Okay.
her values, how those line up with God's will. Dr. Palmer describes her wisdom as this blend of intelligence, discernment, and experience.
So it's about making sound judgments, seeing the bigger picture, navigating through life with clarity and purpose. And I'm guessing that doesn't happen overnight, does it?
Definitely not. It's a lifelong process of learning and seeking guidance
Right.
and trusting your intuition.
So it's not like you're born wise. It's something you cultivate throughout your life.
Exactly.
Which makes me wonder, what role does hope play in all of this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that Dr. Palmer addresses directly.
Oh, okay.
He talks about the virtuous woman's unwavering hope,
Okay.
even when things are really challenging.
But what does that mean practically? Is it just blind optimism?
Not at all. It's a hope that comes from her deep faith, a belief that even when things are tough, God is working it all out for good.
So it's not about ignoring the difficulties, but about having a perspective that allows you to see beyond them.
Precisely. Knowing there's something bigger happening, even if you can't see the whole picture yet.
Yeah. And I imagine that kind of hope, it can be pretty contagious, right? Like it can inspire others to keep going even when things are hard.
Absolutely. It's like a light in the darkness.
So the virtuous woman isn't just a model of personal success. She's actually a source of hope and inspiration for others.
That's a beautiful way to put it. She embodies that hope and shares it with the world around her.
That's so powerful. So we've talked about her faith, her attitude, her compassion, her wisdom, her hope. It seems like being a virtuous woman is about so much more than just following rules.
Absolutely. It's about a way of being, a way of living.
It's about living with intention, with purpose, and with a heart full of faith and compassion.
Yes. And that's something that transcends time and culture. It's a timeless ideal that speaks to all of us.
I love that. It's like she's a beacon guiding us towards a better way of life.
Exactly. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some specific examples from Proverbs 31 that bring this to life.
I can't wait to hear more. This is already giving me so much to think about.
Me too. There's so much richness and depth to unpack here.
I have a feeling our listeners are going to be just as fascinated by this as we are.
I think so too. This concept of the virtuous woman is truly timeless and inspiring.
Well, until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
And we'll see you soon for part 2 of our exploration of the virtuous woman. It really is. And it makes me think about the description in Proverbs 31. She's definitely not just sitting back waiting for things to happen.
Right.
She's out there making things happen.
That's true. And that actually reminds me,
Yeah.
we talked about her business skills earlier, but there's so much more in Proverbs 31.
Oh yeah, there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, it's like a blueprint for a well-rounded life.
I think that's part of what makes it so relevant,
Right.
even today.
Yeah.
It's not about some ancient rule book. It's about these principles that guide you toward a meaningful life.
I like that.
no matter what your circumstances are.
So what are some of those principles from Proverbs 31 that really stand out to you?
Well, her work ethic, for sure.
Okay.
She's not afraid to roll up her sleeves.
Mm,
She's up before dawn, working late.
that sounds pretty intense.
It does, but I think there's a balance there, too.
Right, like we're all about work-life balance these days.
Exactly. It's not about burning yourself out.
Mm.
It's about making the most of your time and energy.
So working smarter, not just harder.
Right. And making sure your work aligns with your values.
So what else does Proverbs 31 tell us about her?
Well, she's also incredibly generous,
Okay.
always looking out for those in need.
And that's not just about money, right?
No, it's about giving of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Your time, your talents, your compassion.
And that reminds me of what we were talking about before with the agreeable attitude.
Absolutely.
It's not just about doing good things, but the heart behind it.
Exactly. That's what makes all the difference.
So it's not checking things off a list.
Right.
It's about that genuine desire to help.
And sometimes the smallest things have the biggest impact.
Oh, absolutely.
Just a smile or a listening ear
Yeah.
can make someone's day.
It's amazing how much power there is in that.
It really is.
So the virtuous woman isn't about perfection. It's about making those daily choices to live a life that reflects your values.
I couldn't agree more. It's that journey of becoming.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, there's another aspect of her character we haven't touched on yet. Courage.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily thought of that.
Right. We often think of virtue as being kind of quiet,
Mm-hmm.
but true courage is about standing up for what you believe in.
Yeah. That takes a lot of strength sometimes.
It does. You need that inner resilience
Right.
to speak truth to power, to fight for justice.
And that comes from a deep conviction, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's where faith comes in again.
Okay.
It's not just a set of beliefs. It gives her that strength to stand firm.
So it's not just a comfort in times of trouble. It's what drives her to action.
Exactly. And that kind of courage can be so inspiring to others.
Yeah, like it gives them permission to find their own voice.
Absolutely.
It all comes back to this one woman.
Right. The virtuous woman,
Yeah.
she shows us what's possible.
And it reminds us that we don't have to do it alone.
Oh, that's so important.
We have each other, our communities, and something bigger than ourselves to support us.
Exactly. And that brings us back to hope.
Mm-hmm.
Even when things are tough, she never loses sight of it.
It's not just wishing for a better future.
No, it's about creating that future.
Yeah, taking action to make it happen.
And what I find so inspiring is that Dr. Palmer reminds us it's not about being perfect.
Okay.
It's about progress.
That's a good reminder.
It is. We don't have to have it all figured out.
So it's not about avoiding challenges. It's about learning from them.
Exactly. And using those challenges to grow.
And that's where wisdom comes in again, right?
Right. Learning from our mistakes, seeking guidance, trusting our intuition.
And remembering that we have support.
Yes. We're not on this journey alone.
We have each other. We have the wisdom of those who came before us.
And we have a power greater than ourselves to guide us.
That's a powerful message. No matter what we're facing, we're not alone.
And sometimes all it takes is that first step to start moving towards that greater purpose.
That's so true. So what are some practical ways our listeners can start embodying these principles?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it starts with reflection.
Oh.
Think about the qualities we've talked about.
Faith, courage, compassion.
Generosity, wisdom, hope.
Which ones resonate with you?
Exactly. And then ask yourself, where am I already living those out?
Mm-hmm.
And where can I stretch myself a little?
It doesn't have to be a huge change all at once.
Small, consistent steps.
Right.
Those everyday choices.
Yeah.
That's where it all starts.
And those choices can have a ripple effect, making the world a better place.
And, going back to Dr. Palmer, he reminds us that becoming a virtuous woman isn't about reaching some perfect ideal.
Right.
It's about the journey, the progress we make.
That's such a relief.
It is.
It's not about having all the answers.
Or getting everything right.
It's about growing and striving to live our values.
And, that journey might be messy.
Yeah.
Full of twists and turns.
But that's where we learn and grow the most.
Exactly. It's about embracing the challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing that even when we stumble, we can always get back up. And that's where wisdom comes in. Learning from our mistakes, seeking guidance, trusting our gut.
And remembering that we're not alone in this.
Exactly. We have a whole community of support.
And that's something to hold on to.
It is. It really is. We have everything we need to keep moving forward.
And to make a difference.
Absolutely. It all starts with taking that first step.
That's a great reminder. Sometimes it's just about taking that leap of faith.
Exactly. And trusting that we're being guided towards something bigger.
I love that. And, speaking of taking that first step,
Yes.
I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
what are some practical ways listeners can start embodying these principles in their own lives?
That's a great question. And I think it's a very personal one.
Right.
But maybe a good starting point is to think about those qualities we discussed.
Okay.
Faith, courage, compassion, generosity, wisdom, hope.
Mm.
Which ones speak to you the most?
Yeah, and then think about where you're already living those out.
Exactly. And where maybe you could challenge yourself a bit.
It doesn't have to be a huge overnight transformation.
Small steps, consistent effort.
That's what matters.
It really is. Those little choices we make every day.
They can add up to something amazing.
They can. They really can. And I think Dr. Palmer would agree. He emphasizes that it's about progress, not perfection.
It's about the journey.
Exactly. And that journey might be messy.
It might.
Full of twists and turns.
But it's hard journey.
It is. And it's in those messy moments that we often learn the most.
So it's not about avoiding the challenges.
Right.
It's about embracing them.
And trusting that we'll come out stronger on the other side.
And wiser.
And that's where that inner wisdom comes into play.
Right. Learning from our experiences, seeking guidance, trusting our instincts.
And remembering that we're never truly alone.
We have so much support around us.
We do. We really do. And that's something to hold on to.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And it's such a beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about trying to be this, perfect, virtuous woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's about embracing the journey.
Exactly. And remembering that journey is unique for each of us.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Not at all. It's about discovering those gifts you have.
Right, and then using them.
To make a positive impact in your own way.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of that, I remember in Dr. Palmer's devotional, he poses this really thought-provoking question.
Oh, what's that?
He asks, what's one decision in your life where you could really try to align your choice with God's heart?
Wow.
Instead of just going with your emotions.
Right. Or what benefits you personally.
Yeah.
It makes you stop and think about the bigger picture.
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. And it could be any decision, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like in your career, your relationships, even just how you spend your time.
It could be about setting a healthy boundary.
Yeah.
Or having that tough conversation.
Or just showing compassion to someone who needs it.
Exactly. It's about taking that step.
Yeah.
And trusting you're being guided.
And I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners. You don't have to have it all figured out right now.
Not at all.
It's a process of discovery.
And each step you take brings you closer to the woman you're meant to be.
I love that. So embrace the journey, keep learning, and never forget the power of living a life with purpose.
Beautifully said. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the virtuous woman.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. This has been a truly inspiring conversation.
It really has.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this exploration as much as we have.
We encourage you to keep digging into this.
Yeah, definitely check out Proverbs 31 and Dr. Palmer's devotional.
There's so much more to discover there.
Absolutely. And until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep shining your light.
We'll be here cheering you on.
Thanks for listening.